There are moments in life when everything you've ever been, everything you've ever lost, and everything you might become converges into a single heartbeat. For some, that moment comes in a hospital room, a wedding chapel, or at a graveside. For Marcus Webb, it came on a Tuesday afternoon at a shooting range in rural Montana, where the wind carried the scent of pine and gunpowder, and where silence would soon fall like a heavy curtain over 200 witnesses who thought they had seen everything. Marcus stood at the edge of the parking lot, his weathered hands gripping the steering wheel of his truck so tightly his knuckles had turned white. He had been sitting there for 20 minutes, watching people come and go from the range, their laughter and easy conversations floating through his open window like ghosts of a life he used to know. His rifle case lay in the passenger seat, covered with a thin layer of dust that spoke of months, maybe years of neglect. The last time he had held that rifle, he had been a different man entirely. The Veterans Memorial Competition happened every year at this range, drawing former military shooters from across the country. Marcus had received the invitation 3 months ago, forwarded by his old commanding officer who never seemed to understand that some doors were better left closed. The letter had sat on his kitchen table for weeks, gathering coffee stains and the weight of impossible decisions, until his daughter Emma had found it during one of her increasingly frequent visits to check on him. Emma was 16 now, with her mother's dark eyes and a stubbornness that Marcus recognized as his own. She had read the invitation without asking permission, then looked at her father with an expression that somehow managed to be both hopeful and heartbroken. "You should go," she had said quietly. "Mom would have wanted you to go." Marcus had wanted to argue, to explain that her mother would have wanted a lot of things that were no longer possible. But the words died in his throat when he saw the way Emma's hands trembled slightly as she held the paper. In that moment he realized that his daughter had been carrying her own weight of grief and worry, watching her father disappear a little more each day, into a silence that had nothing to do with peace and everything to do with running away. So here he was, parked outside the range, fighting every instinct that told him to turn the truck around and drive back to the empty house where he had spent the last 18 months avoiding mirrors and memories in equal measure. The accident that killed his wife Sarah had happened on a Tuesday too. Some part of his mind found bitter poetry in that fact, as if Tuesdays themselves had become cursed, marked on the calendar with invisible blood that only he could see. A tap on his window made Marcus jump, his heart hammering with the kind of sudden adrenaline that had become all too familiar. An older man stood outside, his face weathered like old leather, eyes sharp and knowing beneath the brim of a faded Marine's cap. Marcus recognized him instantly, though 20 years had passed since they had last spoken. Sergeant Thomas Riley had been his instructor at boot camp, the man who had first placed a rifle in Marcus's hands and taught him that shooting was never just about pulling a trigger. Marcus rolled down the window, and Riley leaned against the truck with the casual ease of someone who had nowhere else to be, and all the time in the world to get there. "You planning to shoot from in here, Webb? Because I've got to tell you, the targets are a fair distance away, and this windshield might affect your accuracy." Despite everything, Marcus felt the corner of his mouth twitch in what might have been the beginning of a smile. "I was just thinking, Sergeant." "That's usually when we get in the most trouble," Riley said, his tone light but his eyes serious. "Look, I'm not going to tell you that you have to come inside. Lord knows you've had orders enough to last a lifetime. But I will tell you that there are about 30 former soldiers in there, most of them carrying their own loads of things they wish they could forget." "You're not alone in this, son. Not by a long shot." Marcus wanted to tell him that it wasn't the same, that his burden was different, heavier somehow. But he had spent enough time in therapy, sitting in the mandated sessions after Sarah's death, to know that grief was not a competition, and pain was not measured on a universal scale. Every person in that range had their own demons, their own Tuesdays marked in invisible blood. "The competition," Marcus said slowly, his voice rough from disuse. "What's the challenge this year?" Riley straightened up, and something flickered across his face, an expression that Marcus couldn't quite read. "It's a distance shot, 1,000 yards with iron sights only. No scopes, no laser rangefinders, nothing but the shooter, the rifle, and the wind. They're calling it an impossible shot. In 30 years of running this competition, no one has ever made it. 1,000 yards. Marcus did the mental calculation automatically, his mind falling into the familiar patterns of windage and elevation, of bullet drop and atmospheric pressure. With a scope, it would be difficult but achievable. With iron sights alone, It bordered on the realm of pure luck rather than skill. The human eye simply wasn't designed to see that kind of detail at such distance. Why would they set up something impossible? Marcus asked. Riley's expression softened. Because sometimes we need to be reminded that trying matters more than succeeding. Because sometimes the act of taking aim is more important than hitting the target. You, of all people, should understand that, Marcus. Before Marcus could respond, Riley pushed off from the truck and started walking toward the range entrance. He paused after a few steps and looked back. Your daughter called me last week. She's worried about you. Said you haven't left the house except for groceries in months. Said you sit in the garage with that rifle case, but you never open it. The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. Emma had called Riley? How had she even known who to contact? But even as the questions formed, Marcus knew the answers. Emma was resourceful, determined, and desperate to see her father come back to life. She had probably spent hours researching, finding old contacts, building bridges that Marcus had spent years burning. She shouldn't have done that, Marcus said, but there was no anger in his voice, only a deep weariness and something else, something that might have been gratitude if he could allow himself to feel it. Probably not, Riley agreed, but when has that ever stopped anyone from doing what needs to be done? You've got a choice here, Marcus. You can sit in this truck and let the weight keep pressing down until there's nothing left of the man you used to be, or you can pick up that rifle, walk through those doors, and take one shot. Just one. It doesn't have to be perfect. It doesn't have to hit anything. It just has to be yours. Riley walked away without waiting for a response. Through the open door, Marcus could see figures moving inside, hear the muffled sounds of conversation and occasional laughter. It sounded foreign to him now, that easy camaraderie, that sense of belonging to something larger than oneself. His phone buzzed in his pocket. A text from Emma. Hope you're having a good day, Dad. Love you. Such simple words, but they carried the weight of everything unsaid between them. Emma never asked if he had gone to the Grange, never pushed or demanded. She simply sent these little messages, gentle reminders that someone was waiting for him to come back, that someone believed he still could. Marcus picked up the rifle case, surprised by how much heavier it felt than he remembered. Or perhaps it wasn't the rifle that had gained weight, but the memories attached to it. This rifle had been a gift from Sarah on their 10th anniversary. A custom-made piece that she had saved for over a year to afford. She had known, somehow, that Marcus needed more than just a weapon or a tool. He needed something that represented precision, patience, and the quiet satisfaction of doing something difficult exceptionally well. The last time Marcus had used this rifle, Sarah had been standing beside him at a different range, laughing at his attempts to teach her the basics of long-distance shooting. She had been terrible at it, flinching at every shot. Her group scattered across the target like abstract art. But she had tried because it mattered to him, because sharing his world was more important than being good at everything within it. 3 months later, she was gone. A drunk driver, a rainy night, and a split-second collision that ended 38 years of life and 18 years of marriage. Marcus had been on duty that night, responding to a different emergency, completely unaware that his own world was ending while he helped save someone else's. He stepped out of the truck, and the Montana wind hit him immediately, carrying with it the smell of sage and distant rain. The sky was the kind of endless blue that seemed to stretch into forever, broken only by a few wispy clouds that moved like slow dancers across the horizon. It was the kind of day Sarah had loved, the kind that made her want to pack a picnic and drive until the roads turned to dirt and the cell signal disappeared. The rifle case bumped against his leg as Marcus walked toward the range entrance, each step feeling like moving through water, resistance building with every inch of progress. It could still turn back. No one would blame him. Riley would understand, Emma would forgive him, and he could return to the comfortable numbness that had become his constant companion. But then he thought of Emma's text, of the hope buried in those simple words, of the way his daughter looked at him now with eyes that tried to hide disappointment behind unconditional love. He thought of Sarah, of how she had never accepted easy answers or comfortable lies, how she had pushed him to be better, even when being better hurt. The range was busier than Marcus had expected. At least 40 people filled the space, some in military surplus clothing, others in civilian gear marked with the telltale signs of serious shooters. Worn patches on shoulders, calluses on trigger fingers, eyes that assessed distances automatically. A large banner hung at the far end, 22nd Annual Veterans Memorial Shoot. Honoring service, building community. Riley was talking to a small group near the registration table, and he caught Marcus's eye with a subtle nod of acknowledgement before returning to his conversation. Marcus appreciated the restraint, the understanding that this moment needed to be private, that walking through these doors was its own kind of victory that didn't need to be announced or celebrated. He found an empty spot at the check-in table where a young woman with a clipboard and a warm smile greeted him. Name? Marcus Webb. She scanned her list, found his name, and handed him a packet of information. You're shooter number 17. The competition starts in about an hour. There's coffee and sandwiches in the back if you're hungry, and the practice range is open if you want to warm up. The main event is a single shot at 1,000 yards. Iron sights only. Everyone gets one attempt. Best of luck. Marcus took the packet but didn't open it. Instead, he carried his rifle case to the practice range, a smaller area set up with targets at various distances. A few other shooters were already there, and Marcus found a spot at the far end, away from the casual conversations and easy familiarity that seemed to fill every corner of this place. He opened the case slowly, almost reverently, and the sight of the rifle hit him harder than he had expected. Sarah had insisted on a custom stock, carved from walnut with his initials inlaid in silver. She had been so proud of herself for keeping the secret, for planning something that perfectly balanced practicality with sentiment. Marcus remembered her face when he had opened the box, the way her eyes had lit up with pure joy at having surprised him so completely. The rifle felt good in his hands, balanced and familiar despite the months of separation. His muscle memory kicked in automatically, checking the action, confirming it was unloaded, running through safety protocols that had been drilled into him until they became as natural as breathing. This was the language he still understood, the vocabulary of precision and control when everything else in life felt chaotic and incomprehensible. Marcus loaded a single round and took aim at a target 200 yards downrange. Through the iron sights, the target seemed both too close and impossibly far. His hands were steady, his breathing controlled, but something felt off, like trying to write with the wrong hand or speak in a language he had once been fluent in but had forgotten through disuse. He squeezed the trigger, and the rifle spoke its single-syllable sentence. Downrange. The target remained unmarked, his shot missing wide by at least 6 inches. Marcus lowered the rifle, stunned. 6 inches at 200 yards was a beginner's mistake, the kind of error that should have been impossible for someone with his training and experience. He tried again, and again the shot went wide, this time in the opposite direction. Then a third attempt that hit low, barely catching the edge of the target. Marcus set the rifle down carefully, his hands beginning to shake for reasons that had nothing to do with physical exhaustion, and everything to do with the realization that he had lost more than his wife in that accident. He had lost himself. The steady hands, the clear focus, the absolute certainty that existed in the space between heartbeats, all of it was gone, scattered like ashes in a wind that never stopped blowing. Marcus had been one of the best marksmen in his unit, the soldier who could thread a needle at distances that made other shooters shake their heads in disbelief. Now he couldn't hit a stationary target at a distance any decent hunter could manage. The hour passed faster than Marcus wanted it to. An announcement called all competitors to the main range, where the impossible shot awaited. The target was set at exactly 1,000 yards, verified by laser rangefinder and marked with a series of flags that showed the wind's current direction and strength. Without a scope, the target was barely visible, a small speck of white against the brown of the hillside, more suggested than seen. Marcus joined the line of shooters, each waiting their turn to attempt what everyone already agreed was impossible. He watched as shooter after shooter stepped up to the firing line, took their time settling into position, and fired their single allowed shot. Some came close, landing within a few feet of the target. Others missed by yards, their bullets kicking up dirt in silent testimony to the difficulty of the challenge. None hit the mark. Riley announced each attempt over a PA system, his voice carrying across the range with professional detachment that somehow managed to be both respectful and encouraging. Shooter number 8, Miller, 2 feet high and 1 foot right. Good attempt. Shooter number 11, Jackson, 3 feet left. Better than last year. As Marcus watched, he began to understand what Riley had meant about the attempt being more important than the result. Every shooter who stepped up to that line was fighting their own battle, wrestling with their own demons while pretending it was just about a target and a bullet. He saw it in the way one man's hand shook before he fired, in the deep breath another took that seemed to come from somewhere beyond his lungs, in the slight smile that crossed a woman's face even though her shot landed nowhere near the mark. They weren't really shooting at a target 1,000 yards away. They were shooting at distance measured in years and trauma, at wounds that had nothing to do with bullets and everything to do with the cost of service that continued long after uniforms were packed away. Shooter number 13 stepped up to the line, a man Marcus vaguely recognized from somewhere in his past, though the specifics remained frustratingly out of reach. The man settled into position with practiced ease, his breathing slow and measured, his body language speaking of countless hours spent in exactly this position. When he fired, the shot came as a surprise, despite everyone watching for it. That perfect release that separated amateurs from professionals. The bullet struck 4 inches to the left of the target, close enough that a few people in the crowd let out appreciative whistles. Marcus found himself calculating without meaning to, his mind automatically processing the information. Wind speed, angle of deflection, bullet drop over distance. The numbers came easier than they had in months, flowing through his consciousness like water finding its natural course. Perhaps muscle memory extended beyond the physical, reaching into the mental pathways that had been carved through years of training and practice. Shooter number 14, Rodriguez. A woman stepped forward, her grey hair pulled back in a tight bun, her stance revealing a career of military precision. She took longer than most to settle, making minute adjustments to her position, checking and rechecking her sight picture. When she finally fired, the silence that followed seemed heavier than usual. Her bullet struck the frame that held the target, missing the paper itself by less than 2 inches. It was the closest anyone had come all day. The crowd erupted in applause, and Riley's voice carried genuine respect when he announced the result. Rodriguez stood slowly, a small smile playing at the corners of her mouth, and Marcus understood something important in that moment. She hadn't needed to hit the target to achieve what she came here for. The attempt itself, the act of standing in front of witnesses and trying something impossibly difficult, had given her something that success or failure couldn't take away. Shooter number 15, Chen. Shooter number 16, Kowalski. Each attempt brought its own story, its own small drama of hope and physics, of willpower meeting the immutable laws of ballistics. Marcus felt his heart rate increasing as his turn approached, that familiar pre-shot anxiety that he had thought was lost along with everything else. But it wasn't anxiety about the shot itself. It was something deeper, more fundamental. This was the first thing in 18 months that Marcus had genuinely cared about achieving. The first time he had allowed himself to want something beyond the basic necessities of continued existence. Shooter number 17. Webb. His legs carried him forward automatically, and he was aware of the weight of eyes on him, of the collective attention that came with stepping into the spotlight. But more than that, he was aware of the rifle in his hands, of Sarah's gift that had waited patiently for him to be ready to receive it again. Marcus reached the firing line and looked down range at the target that was more theory than visible reality. 1,000 yards. In sniper training, he had made shots at this distance regularly, but that had been with advanced optics, computerized rangefinders, and the kind of equipment that turned shooting into something approaching science. This was different. This was about stripping away all the technology, all the advantages, and returning to the most basic equation: one person, one rifle, one bullet, and the vast distance between intention and impact. He lowered himself into shooting position, feeling the familiar press of the ground against his body, the rifle settling into the pocket of his shoulder like it belonged there. Through the iron sights, he could barely distinguish the target from its surroundings. At this distance, everything blurred together, and Marcus realized that hitting the mark would require something beyond visual acuity. It would require trust, the kind of absolute faith in training and instinct that he hadn't been capable of since the night Sarah died. The wind picked up slightly, a gust that Marcus felt against his face before he saw its effect in the movement of the distant flags. He made a mental adjustment, adding it to the calculations that ran beneath the surface of his conscious thought. Elevation for bullet drop, windage for drift, breathing pattern to minimize movement, heart rate control to prevent the slight tremor that could turn a perfect shot into a near miss. But as Marcus prepared to fire, something unexpected happened. In the space behind his closed eyes, Sarah appeared, not as a ghost or a hallucination, but as a memory so vivid it felt more real than the ground beneath him. They were at the range where she had given him this rifle, and she was laughing at something he had said, her whole face alight with the kind of joy that made everything else in the world seem less important. "You're thinking too much," she said in his memory. her voice carrying that particular tone she used when she knew she was right about something. "I've watched you shoot 100 times, Marcus. You're best when you stop trying to control everything and just let it happen." Marcus opened his eyes and the memory faded but didn't disappear. It hung there in the periphery of his awareness, a gentle presence rather than the crushing weight grief had been for so long. Sarah was right. She had always been right about this. Marcus had spent 18 months trying to control his grief, to manage it and contain it, and somehow make sense of something that would never make sense. He had been thinking too much, calculating every emotion, measuring every memory against the pain it would cost him to recall it. This shot was the same. He could calculate wind and distance and elevation until his brain burned with the effort. But at some point, shooting came down to something beyond numbers. It came down to trust, to the accumulated experience of every shot he had ever taken, every lesson he had ever learned, every moment he had spent understanding the subtle language that existed between a rifle and the person holding it. His breathing slowed, deepened, found the rhythm that separated each heartbeat into its own small universe of time. The rifle became an extension of his body, so natural that he couldn't tell where his bones ended and the steel began. But he didn't fire. Not yet. In the silence before the shot, Marcus became aware of something he hadn't noticed before. The crowd behind him had gone completely quiet. No whispered conversations, no shuffling feet, no coughs or cleared throats. 200 people held their breath collectively, as if they sensed that this moment was somehow different from all the attempts that had come before. Marcus thought about Emma, about the hope in her text message, about the way she looked at him with eyes that still believed her father could be the man he used to be. He thought about Riley and the veterans who had made this day possible, who understood that healing sometimes required facing the things that hurt the most. He thought about Sarah, about the life they had built together and the future that had been stolen in a single moment of someone else's terrible decision. But most of all, Marcus thought about the distance between who he had been and who he had become, and whether that distance could ever truly be crossed. Was it possible to be a marksman without being a husband? A father without being half of a partnership? A man without the woman who had seen him at his best and worst and loved him through both? The answer came not in words but in feeling, in the sudden understanding that he wasn't trying to become who he had been. That man was gone, taken by the same accident that took Sarah. Marcus was trying to become someone new, someone who carried loss without being defined by it, who remembered love without being destroyed by its absence. This shot wasn't about proving he was still the marksman he used to be. It was about proving he was still capable of trying, still willing to take aim at something difficult, even when success felt impossible. Marcus's finger found the trigger, that small curve of metal that represented the boundary between potential and action. The pressure required was exactly 4 pounds, a specific threshold that had to be crossed deliberately, consciously, with absolute commitment. He began to apply that pressure gradually, slowly, feeling the trigger travel through its arc like a planet moving through space. And then, in the heartbeat before the shot, Marcus did something he hadn't done since the funeral. He smiled. Not a large smile, not the kind that transformed a face or lit up a room, but a small, genuine expression of something that might have been peace, or at least the first hint of its possibility. The rifle fired, and the sound seemed to echo longer than physics would allow, rolling across the range and into the mountains beyond like a proclamation written in thunder. The recoil was familiar, comfortable, a known quantity in a world that had become full of unknowns. Marcus held his position for a moment longer, not because he needed to for accuracy, but because he wasn't quite ready to return to the world where results mattered and where the shot he had just taken would either be celebrated or forgotten. But eventually, reality insisted. Marcus lowered the rifle and looked downrange, squinting at the distant target that remained stubbornly unclear. Around him, the silence continued, stretching into something that felt less like absence of sound and more like presence of attention. Everyone was waiting, watching the spotters positioned near the target with binoculars and radios, waiting for the report that would confirm what the naked eye couldn't see. Riley's voice came over the PA system, but there was something different in his tone, a quality that Marcus couldn't immediately identify. Hold for confirmation. Spotters are checking the target. The weight felt infinite. Marcus stood slowly, his joints protesting the movement after holding position for so long. He could feel the eyes of the crowd on him, the weight of their curiosity and expectation. Some were probably already moving on mentally, assuming another miss, Another addition to the days-long list of close attempts that fell short. Others might be allowing themselves a moment of hope, wondering if perhaps this time might be different. Marcus found he didn't care as much as he thought he would. The shot was taken, the bullet was flying or already landed, and the outcome was already determined by forces he could no longer influence. There was freedom in that, in the understanding that his part in this was complete regardless of where that bullet ended up. A crackle of static interrupted the silence, and then a spotter's voice came through, distant and slightly distorted by the radio transmission. "We need a second confirmation. Rodriguez, can you verify?" Marcus saw Rodriguez, the woman who had come so close earlier, raise her binoculars and focus on the distant target. She held that position for what felt like minutes but was probably only seconds, and then she lowered the binoculars slowly, her expression unreadable. She turned to face the crowd, and in that moment before she spoke, Marcus saw something flash across her face: surprise, wonder, and something else. Something that looked almost like recognition, as if she had just witnessed something she had been waiting her whole life to see. Rodriguez raised her voice to carry across the range. Direct hit, dead center. The words didn't register immediately. Marcus heard them, understood the individual meanings, but couldn't quite assemble them into a coherent truth. Dead center, from 1,000 yards. With iron sights. Something that 30 years of competition had declared impossible. The silence broke like a dam bursting, and suddenly the range erupted in noise. Cheering, whistles, applause that seemed to come from everywhere at once. People surged forward, and Marcus found himself surrounded by veterans he didn't know, all of them wanting to shake his hand, clap his shoulder, share in a moment that had somehow become larger than one person's achievement. Riley was there too, pushing through the crowd with tears streaming unashamedly down his weathered face. When he reached Marcus, he didn't say anything at first, just pulled him into a hard embrace that spoke of pride and relief and 1,000 other emotions that had no adequate words. When Riley finally pulled back, his voice was rough. "I told you," he said. "I told you that trying was more important than hitting the target. But damn if it doesn't feel good when both things happen at once." Marcus looked down at the rifle in his hands, at Sarah's gift that had waited patiently for him to be ready. The wood gleamed in the afternoon sun, the silver inlay of his initials catching the light. He ran his thumb over those letters, and for the first time in 18 months, the gesture didn't bring pain. Instead, it brought something simpler and more complex at the same time. Memory without agony, love without the crushing weight of loss. Someone handed Marcus a phone, and he looked at the screen to see a photo that had been taken downrange. The target filled the frame, and there, perfectly centered in the bullseye, was a single hole where his bullet had torn through paper and wood, creating a mark that would fade but never truly disappear. The celebration continued around Marcus, but he felt strangely detached from it, as if he were watching the scene through glass. People kept approaching him, wanting to know his secret, asking about his training, speculating about the incredible luck or skill or combination of both that had made the impossible shot possible. Marcus answered politely but vaguely, because the truth was that he didn't entirely understand what had happened either. The shot had felt right in a way that transcended technique, in a way that had more to do with letting go than holding on. After about 20 minutes, Riley appeared at Marcus's elbow and gently steered him away from the crowd toward a quieter area behind the main building. They sat on a weathered bench that overlooked a small valley, where the late afternoon sun painted everything in shades of gold and amber. Riley didn't say anything at first, just sat there companionably, giving Marcus space to process whatever needed processing. Finally, Marcus broke the silence. "I shouldn't have made that shot." Riley turned to look at him, one eyebrow raised. "'Cause it was impossible? Son, I've been running this competition for 16 years, and I've seen shooters who could thread a needle at 100 yards miss that target by a mile. I've also seen rank amateurs come within inches. Skill matters, but it's not everything. Sometimes the universe just aligns in exactly the right way. It's not about luck," Marcus said, struggling to articulate something he barely understood himself. "On the practice range earlier, I couldn't hit a target at 200 yards. I missed 3 shots in a row by distances that would embarrass a first-time shooter. My hands were shaking. My focus was gone. I thought I had lost it completely, that everything I used to be had disappeared with Sarah." Riley nodded slowly, his expression thoughtful. But something changed between then and the competition shot. What was it? Marcus looked down at his hands, at the calluses and scars that told the story of a lifetime spent working with tools and weapons. I stopped trying to be who I was before, he said quietly. I stopped trying to shoot the way I used to feel the way I used to be the person Sarah fell in love with, because that person doesn't exist anymore. He died in the same accident that killed her, and I've been fighting that truth for 18 months. And during the shot, I just let go. I stopped fighting. I stopped trying to control everything. I remembered something Sarah told me once about how I was better when I trusted my instincts instead of overthinking every decision. So I did. I trusted that the training would be there when I needed it, that muscle memory was real, that some part of me still knew how to do this, even if the rest of me had forgotten. Riley was quiet for a long moment, and when he spoke, his voice carried the weight of hard-earned wisdom. You know what I think? I think you didn't lose who you were, Marcus. I think you've been carrying him around like dead weight, trying to preserve something that was never meant to be preserved. People aren't statues. We change, we adapt, we become different versions of ourselves as life demands it. The man who made that shot today isn't the same man who married Sarah 20 years ago. But he's not less than that man. He's just different. And maybe, just maybe, that's okay. Marcus felt something shift inside him at those words, like a lock tumbling open after years of being frozen. Riley was right. He had been treating his past self like a sacred relic, something to be protected and mourned, rather than as simply one chapter in a continuing story. Sarah had loved the man he was when she knew him, but she had also loved watching him change and grow. She had never wanted him to become fixed, unchanging, preserved in amber like some extinct species. His phone buzzed in his pocket. Emma's name appeared on the screen, followed by a message that made Marcus's throat tighten. Sergeant Riley sent me a video. Dad, I'm so proud of you. Mom would be too. Can we talk tonight? Marcus stared at the message, reading it 3 times, 4 times. Emma was proud of him. Not because he had made an impossible shot, but because he had shown up, because he had tried. Because he had taken one step out of the darkness that had consumed him for so long. And that small step, that tiny movement toward the light, was worth more than any trophy or record or achievement. He typed back carefully. I'd like that. I love you, Emma. Thank you for not giving up on me. The response came almost immediately. Never. You're my dad. That means something. Marcus showed the message to Riley, who read it with a smile that seemed to carry its own kind of warmth. Smart kid you've got there. She understands what matters. She gets that from her mother, Marcus said, and for the first time saying those words didn't feel like swallowing broken glass. Sarah always knew what mattered. She could cut through all the noise and complication and see straight to the heart of things. What do you think she'd say about today? Riley asked. Marcus thought about that, really thought about it, trying to imagine Sarah's reaction not as he wished it would be, but as it truly would have been. She would have been surprised by the shot, certainly, maybe even impressed, but more than that, she would have been relieved. Relieved that he had left the house, that he had connected with other people, that he had allowed himself to be vulnerable enough to try something difficult in front of witnesses. The shot itself would have been secondary to the fact that he had shown up at all. She'd probably make some joke about it, Marcus said, a genuine smile touching his lips for the first time in what felt like years. She'd say something like, well, it's about time you did something impressive. I was getting worried you'd forgotten how. And then she'd hug me and tell me she was glad I came, and we'd probably go get dinner somewhere and talk about everything except the actual shot. Riley laughed, a sound full of understanding. She sounds like she was something special. She was, Marcus agreed. She really was. And I think. He paused, surprised by what he was about to say, but knowing it was true. I think she'd be angry with me for spending 18 months hiding from the world. She'd understand the grief, the pain, all of that. But she'd be frustrated that I let it stop me from living. Sarah believed life was too short and too precious to waste on fear. So what are you going to do about it? Riley asked. The question hung in the air between them, heavy with implications. What was Marcus going to do? He could return to the empty house, to the comfortable numbness of routine and avoidance. He could treat today as an anomaly, a brief moment of functionality in an otherwise broken existence. Or he could do something harder, something that terrified him more than any shot ever could. He could choose to keep trying. I'm going to have dinner with my daughter, Marcus said slowly. working through the answer as he spoke it. And I'm going to tell her about her mother. Really tell her not just the sanitized memories I've been feeding her, the good and the bad, the funny and the sad, everything that made Sarah who she was. Emma deserves to know her mother as a complete person, not just as a tragedy. Riley nodded approvingly. That's a good start. What else? I'm going to sell the house, Marcus continued, the decision forming even as he voiced it. Every room is full of ghosts, and I can't heal in a place that's dedicated to preservation. Sarah and I bought that house together, but it doesn't have to be a shrine to our marriage. I'll find somewhere smaller, somewhere that can be mine, where I can build a new life that honors the past without being imprisoned by it. And the rifle? Riley gestured toward the case that sat at Marcus's feet. Marcus picked it up, feeling its weight again, but this time the weight felt different. Not lighter exactly, but more balanced. I'll keep shooting. Maybe not competitively, maybe just for myself. But I won't let it sit in a case gathering dust anymore. Sarah gave me this gift because she wanted me to have something that brought me joy, not something that brought me pain. I owe it to her to remember that. The sun was beginning to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple that seemed almost too beautiful to be real. Marcus and Riley sat in comfortable silence, watching the day end and something new begin. In the distance, Marcus could hear the sounds of the range winding down. People packing up their equipment, saying goodbyes, making plans for next year. "You'll come back?" Riley asked, though it wasn't really a question. "To the competition next year." Marcus surprised himself by nodding. "Yeah, I think I will. Not to try to repeat this shot because that would be impossible for entirely different reasons, but to be part of something, to remember that I'm not alone in carrying weight that sometimes feels unbearable. Everyone here today was fighting their own battle, and there was something powerful about doing that together." Riley stood, extending his hand. "You're welcome any time, Marcus, not just for competitions. If you ever need to talk, to shoot, or just to sit in silence with someone who understands, you know where to find me." Marcus shook his hand, then found himself pulling Riley into a brief embrace. "Thank you for the invitation, for the patience, for not letting me disappear completely. I don't know if I would have made it here without you." "You would have," Riley said with certainty. "Maybe it would have taken longer. Maybe you would have found a different path, but you would have made it. Some people are fighters, Marcus, and you're one of them. You just needed to remember that surviving isn't the same as living." Marcus walked back to his truck alone, giving himself time to process everything that had happened. The parking lot was nearly empty now, just a few stragglers loading up their vehicles and preparing for the drive home. His truck sat where he had left it, but somehow it looked different, as if the act of walking away from it and then returning had changed something fundamental about its nature. He loaded the rifle carefully, but this time he didn't cover it with dust. This time he placed it where he could see it, a reminder not of loss but of possibility. The drive home took him through country he had driven hundreds of times, but he saw it differently now, noticing details he had ignored for months. A hawk circling overhead, wildflowers blooming in the ditch, an old barn that was slowly surrendering to gravity and time. When Marcus pulled into his driveway, he sat for a moment looking at the house where he and Sarah had built their life together. It was a good house, full of good memories, but Riley was right. He needed to let it go. Not because staying would be wrong, but because holding on too tightly to the physical spaces that contain memory was just another form of paralysis. His phone rang as he was climbing out of the truck. Emma's name appeared on the screen, and Marcus answered without hesitation. "Dad?" Emma's voice was tentative but hopeful. "Is it still okay if I come over? I know it's getting late, but I really want to see you." "Come over," Marcus said, and he was surprised by how much he meant it. "I'll order pizza, and we can talk. Really talk. Not just the surface conversations we'd been having. I want to tell you about your mum, about today, about a lot of things." There was a pause, and then Emma's voice came back softer, filled with emotion. "I'd really like that, Dad. I've missed you. The real you, I mean. The dad who used to laugh and tell stories and wasn't afraid of his own memories." Marcus felt tears prick at his eyes, but he didn't fight them. "I've missed me too, sweetheart. But I think I'm finding my way back. It's going to take time, and it's going to be hard. But I'm trying. And that has to count for something. It counts for everything." Emma said firmly, "I'll be there in 20 minutes. Don't you dare order pineapple on the pizza." Marcus laughed, actually laughed, and the sound felt strange and wonderful at the same time. "You sound just like your mother." She hated pineapple on pizza too, because it's an abomination against both pizza and pineapple, Emma said, repeating one of Sarah's favorite lines. "See you soon, Dad. I love you. I love you too." Emma, drive carefully. Marcus hung up and stood in his driveway, looking at the sky where the first stars were beginning to appear. He thought about the shot he had made, about the impossible becoming possible, about the way one moment could contain both an ending and a beginning. Somewhere in the space between trigger pull and impact, between intention and result, Marcus had found something he thought was lost forever. Not the man he used to be. That man was gone, and pretending otherwise had been its own form of torture. But a new man, one who carried loss without being destroyed by it, who remembered love without being paralyzed by its absence. A man who could take aim at impossible targets and pull the trigger, trusting that sometimes the universe aligned in exactly the right way. The wind picked up, carrying with it the scent of pine and earth and the promise of rain. Marcus picked up his rifle case and walked toward the house, and with each step he felt the weight on his shoulders lighten just a fraction. He had made one impossible shot today, but the real victory was much simpler and much more profound. He had showed up. He had tried. He had allowed himself to hope for something beyond mere survival. And tomorrow he would wake up and try again. And the day after that, and the day after that. Not because it would be easy, but because it was worth doing. Because Emma was waiting. Because Sarah would have wanted it. Because Riley believed in him. And most importantly, because somewhere deep inside, Marcus still believed in himself. The door opened easily, welcoming him home. And Marcus stepped inside with the understanding that this house, this life, this grief-marked existence was not his forever. It was just where he was now, and now was not the same as always. Change was possible. Growth was possible. Healing was possible. Even when it seemed as impossible as threading a bullet through a target 1,000 yards away. Marcus set the rifle case down carefully and pulled out his phone to order pizza. No pineapple. Extra cheese. Just the way Emma liked it. Just the way Sarah had always ordered it. And in that small act of continuity, of honoring the past while building toward the future, Marcus Webb took his second impossible shot of the day. He chose to keep living.